Welcome to part two of our three-part series, The Evolution and Benefits of Intelligent Storage, sponsored by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and presented by TechTarget. I'm Michael Krieger with TechTarget, and in this part two of our series of three short videos, we'll be talking about how the power of predictive brings intelligent storage to life. Joining me again for our discussion today are two industry experts. George Crump is president and founder of Storage Switzerland. With 25 years of experience designing storage solutions for data centers across the US, he's seen the birth of such storage technologies as RAID, SAN, and NAS, and prior to founding Storage Switzerland, he was CTO at one of the nation's largest storage integrators. Thanks again for coming, George.
Thanks for having me again.
Also with me today is Ivan Iannicone. He's Vice President and GM of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise three-part business, who is responsible for developing next-generation product roadmap and strategy. He's worked around the globe in his capacity and has 17 years of experience in all things IT. Ivan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, part two. The first episode we talked about the need for intelligent storage. We touched on how predictive analytics plays a role. Why is predictive analytics so central to digital transformation and the use of data for a competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think what is interesting about digital transformation is also how the role of IT is going to change. And IT is always seen as a cost center in the business. And actually, with digital transformation, it can become a revenue generator for the business. When you see this kind of transformation, I think it's really important to optimize as much as possible. And this is where artificial intelligence and things like predictive analytics can really help, because it's all about how can I make the most out of my assets, and how can I minimize the amount of operations and OPEX that I'm spending to maintain the infrastructure. And this is really the key, and this is really why we invest in so heavily in predictive analytics.
So how does storage have to be re-envisioned and re-engineered around predictive analytics?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because we started really leveraging predictive analytics after the acquisition of Nimble Storage, because they really built the sensor data, the trace data since day one. But what is interesting is that if we look at FreePAR, that is an architecture that has been in the industry for quite some time, we did something very, very similar when we built the architecture from day one. So it's all about day one decisions when you architect your environment, and it's all about what am I doing to make sure I understand how my customers are using the technology, but also how can I support them in a better way. And it's all about sensor data and traceability of the errors.
I know that before we started doing this today, you and I were talking about how it took so long for three-part to catch on in the marketplace and thin provisioning. Is that what we're going to see? I mean, is that same kind of curve what we're seeing, or is it accelerating because of just the amount of storage that we're dealing with?
Well, I think we're going to see that accelerate, right? The pace at which people are we talked about in the last segment about how data now streams in as opposed to being processed in batches, and how you had even mentioned how the pressure is really on IT to be very operationally efficient. Well, the need for this predictive nature is just going to be driven because you can't get if we hired as many IT people as we wanted, there's not enough available to fill the positions, right? And so as we said before, if the process stops because you have to be interrupted to find out what the problem is, it's just not going to scale, right? You've got to know that there's a problem, and I think what we're talking about with autonomous is the system has kind of got to fix itself now. Because even if it says, hey, I'm broken, there might not be anybody available to fix it. Right. The system's got to fix itself, right?
Yeah, I think George made a very good point, because predictive is just a start, because it assumes that there is somebody that is going to act upon the outcome of the insights, but the goal is really the self-healing. Right. Is the fact that, as issues are found, maybe the first time a human being will fix it, but then that's when machine learning comes into place. You can learn from the action that a human being has taken, and then you can just propagate those actions to all the other customers when you see some very, very similar issues.
And isn't it just really to me, what I see is two real factors, right? Number one is it's just the scale, the mass amount of data. When I talk to IT people today, I typically say, look, you're going to look back at this and think of this as the good old days, because what's coming next is we don't even want to tell you about what's coming next. And then the other side of it is unbelievable, almost insatiable need for performance. You know, when I always hear these guys talking about artificial intelligence, well, the way you simulate the human brain is a computer has to make all kinds of calculations really, really fast as the brain does. That requires I/O and performance, right?
Absolutely.
And I don't think we've seen those two really come together like we are right now.
Yeah, and I think another point that you just made is that there's also a lot of different choices to select what kind of data do I have. There's
Right.
file, there's object, there is a cloud, there is on-prem. So there is a need to also drive some intelligence on how people are going to make the decisions on what is the right protocol and what is the right destination for the data.
Right.
And you can't assume that a human being will make all these decisions because it's not scalable.
Right, exactly.
So can you give me some examples of where people are using predictive analytics in data architecture today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are deploying it across the entire Nimble install base and also the entire Freeport install base. I think the main use case that we have today is really the opportunity for customers to get that end-to-end visibility from the virtual machines to the storage array. And for anybody that has been working in infrastructure for some time, you know how many different layers there are between storage and the operating system. I would say at least 20, 50 different, the different points depending on the architecture. And if you have one single pane of glass, when you can see how the application is behaving, and if it's misbehaving, you know exactly where the bottleneck is. That is just fantastic. When people see this, it's just amazing. So we've had several customers that are using this, and most of them have not found many issues. But when we see customers that have detected issues, they're really able to speed up the troubleshooting process and so on. We've got an example that we always talk to our customers that is a major chemical company in the US. And they were really able to detect some orphan VDI sessions that were really clogging the overall resources on the array. And they were just left there open. So, somebody opened them, from 3 months ago, they just left. Nobody knew what was going on, and then InfoSight and Envision was able to detect them. They shut them down, and they got back 50% of performance.
Wow, that's incredible.
It was just amazing.
And I think that really becomes a key aspect, right? Because in the virtual world, it's not like in the 90s when I remember one time I was walking through a data center and the guy was getting a huge Oracle installation done, and the storage guy didn't know about it. But we tripped over the server that was being installed, and so we started asking questions, right?
Right.
Now that could happen, and you wouldn't even know it because there's no physical server typically being installed,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and the same thing happens, of course, with a lot of cloud deployments where people have spin up instances and completely forget about them and just pay the Amazon bill as it comes in until they realize that it's out there. So it's interesting that we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning now to solve those problems. That's really all the time we have for in this episode 2. I'd like to thank both George and Ivan for joining the discussion and thank Hewlett-Packard Enterprise for making these series possible. Please be sure to watch episode 1 if you haven't, Why Enterprises Need a More Intelligent Storage Infrastructure, and episode 3, Making Intelligent Storage That's Built for the Cloud and Timeless for TechTarget. This is Michael Krieger.